Okay, I want to welcome everybody here today, and we're going to be looking at chapters 19 and 20 of, of the first book of Samuel, and the try to keep track of how many times Saul tried to kill David, because I mean you'd have to keep a scorecard just about to try to figure that one out. And all right, there we go. All right, I think we're ready to go here now. Are there any comments or questions from last week or from the other ones? If you've been reading any of this stuff um, now, one other question that I have. Okay, and the people that are on telephones, the 6920. I don't know who that is. Are you? I've got you muted now, but can you unmute yourself? Maybe not. Okay, I've unmuted you now.
Okay, this is Colette.
Oh, hey Colette. All right. So
Hey.
if you're on a telephone, unless it's a smartphone, I don't know how you would unmute or mute that. But anyway, I'll just leave you. I'll just leave you unmuted as long as you don't start singing. Okay.
Are you no fun? Yeah.
Okay. And I think Cindy Rose, you're 4877, right? Say yes. Or whoever's 487.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Did you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just unmuted you. All right. Good. All right. Good enough. So, I was just wondering how that telephone thing worked, because a lot of times people that get on the telephone then won't participate. Okay, so here we are with our little map or chronology there. I've given that to you before, so it's nothing new. This again is nothing new. It has the chronology of David's life with the various dates that are associated with it. And again, sometimes depending on the whoever the scholar is, they may have different dates. Okay, so anyway, let's go ahead and begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, and this again was the sequence of David's life. This is a mushy one, and because we don't exactly know when some of this stuff played out and in what sequence and so forth. All we know is that at the beginning David was born, at the end David dies, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff in the middle that kind of sort of follows a pattern, but it's not exactly chronological. So let's look at, here we go, chapter 19. Now, these are the things that basically that we're going to look at tonight in chapter 19. Saul put out a contract on David. He wanted him dead. He was going to kill him. And then Jonathan, his son, intervenes. And David again, a war breaks out, and so, okay, time out from killing you, David. I'm going to send you out to the battlefield, and hopefully you'll die there. And so he sends him out to the battlefield, and David comes back in very successful. He was always successful in his battles against the Philistines. And so David comes back, and so Saul has him playing his harp there. I mean, this whole thing is just surreal, because here's David, a mighty man of war. He gets sent out to head up the army of Israel, and he wins. He goes out there and he just kicks butts, takes names, and he wins all the time. And then when he comes back, okay, he's back to playing the harp and singing whatever kinds of songs to Saul. And Saul then, got angry. Evil spirit came over him, and he picks up his spear, and he does this about 3 times. Picks up a spear and chucks it at somebody, and twice at David and once at Jonathan. And all 3 times it misses. So maybe he wasn't really good at the spear, or whatever. But he did that 3 times, and then we see that David's wife Michal um, helps him escape, and then she even jumps into a little bit of chicanery there to try to trick her father Saul, um, and his you know mighty men there that come in to try to arrest David. And then finally we see at the end where Saul eventually he goes out himself instead of sending his minions out to take care of David. He goes himself to Ramah, and then we have the scene of him prophesying. All right, so here we go. Chapter 19, verse 1. Now Saul told his son Jonathan and all his courtiers to kill David, but David's son Jonathan delighted much in David. All right, so again we have this friendship between Jonathan, the son of Saul, the heir apparent, the crown prince, if you would, and David. And so I don't know. I would have to look this up. It just occurred to me that I wonder if Saul, I mean, if Jonathan didn't have any boys, if all he had was girls or something, and he always wanted a son, and here comes David, and so here's the son he never had. We don't know. I don't know right off the top of my head. Maybe one of you scholars out there can figure that one out. But for whatever reason, Jonathan, 30 years older than David, befriends David, and they are lifelong buds. Kind of a strange relationship but he was perhaps a mentor to David in many ways, and in other aspects, David was his own man and his own mighty man of valor and so forth. And so you look at it and say, okay, well, just maybe Jonathan just liked David. I mean, it was strange to me anyway, the way that worked out. And so here in this first verse, we see that now Saul, in the last chapter, in chapter 18, he had that's right, Mephibosheth, or was that his name, or that Jonathan had the crippled son that David later invited to his table. Okay, so he didn't have a son that could be out with him on the battlefield. Nothing says male bonding like going to battle with each other. So or with your boys. And so who knows? I mean, that could have been a reason why Jonathan liked David so much. But then again, everybody in the court seemed to like David. All of the servants, all of the other courtiers, they kind of liked David, and so when the order came down for them to kill David, anybody that saw him, you just kind of have to wonder what was their mindset. What were they thinking? Because they said, "Wait a minute, I like David. I think he's all right. He's good. He's a great guy. He's a good warrior. And oh my goodness, my wife just thinks he can sing like just like whoever, like Frank Sinatra." And so again, just there are some things that make you just want to go, huh? What made that? But Saul now tells everybody, I want David dead, instead of just throwing a spear at him, and maybe 2 or 3 people saw it. But now he's put the word out that he wants David dead. Jonathan remained loyal to David, though. I mean, they were buds. They had been friends for a while, and so Jonathan actually put his friendship above his own family and above his possible the possibility that one of these days he was going to be that could have been the king. So then we go back into there. Jonathan told David, he said, "Don't worry about it. Let me go and talk to the king." And so Jonathan, in verses 4 through 6, says, "So Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul, and said to him, May the king not sin against his servant David, since he has not sinned against you, and since his deeds have been very beneficial for you, for he has put his life in his hand and killed the Philistine, and Adonai won a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. And so why would you sin against innocent blood by killing David without a cause?" So Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan, and and he swore, "As Adonai lives, he will not be put to death." Well, as it turned out, Saul was right. David would not be put to death, but it wasn't because because Saul wasn't trying. Just Saul was never successful, and David died an old man in his bed. So he didn't die in the battle, and he wasn't executed or anything. Although there were some times where it was close. So we see here that Jonathan had directly intervened with Saul. Now, given the fact that Saul was a little bit, well, he was a little bit crazy. Really, is a lot crazy. Okay, I mean, he was. When that evil spirit came on him, it was just kind of like, everybody leave, because you never know who he's going to throw this spear at this time. And I mean, that would have been a terrible way to have to work around a guy like that. And so for him to go to Saul, even though he was his son, because a lot of times with those Eastern potentates, you you just never knew. I mean, years later on, when you had Herod the Great and the Hasmonean king there in Israel, my goodness, that guy killed out most of his family, and just because he was afraid that one of them was going to take away his throne before he was ready to give up his throne, and so David was facing that same kind of a thing, and Jonathan was, had to come up against his father. And the argument was that, look, David had not sinned against you. He hasn't done anything wrong against you. And everything that he does out on the battlefield and whatever, it benefits Israel. And what benefits Israel benefits us. So, everything that he does is good. And then basically that spilling innocent blood would not be good. It would not end well, as it were. So these were his arguments, and then fortunately, Saul, he thought about the arguments, and he realized, okay, yeah, I'm wrong, and he relented, and he swore an oath not to kill David. So at this point, it was interesting that the king actually did listen to someone. So Jonathan called David. Jonathan told him all these things. Jonathan brought David to Saul, and in his presence, as before, once again war broke out. David marched out and fought the Philistines and inflicted a great slaughter on them, and they fled before him. Yet once again, an evil spirit from Adonai came upon Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, as David was playing music with his hand. And Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he slipped away from Saul's face so that he drove the spear into the wall. That night, David fled and got away. Now, it's almost looks like, okay, so what does it say? That David was called by Jonathan to come on back, and they brought him back into the palace, and so here he was, not can you imagine though, the workplace, a hostile workplace here, that David is coming back into the palace. uh, Saul, who's not known for um, his solid way of thinking sometimes nowadays, has said, I want him dead. And then, okay, no, I won't kill him. But then who do you believe? The this Saul here, or the other Saul that's bipolar over here, and which one is which? So going into that environment must have been pretty stressful, I would think, anyway. And so you'd always have to kind of look over your shoulder and keep your eye out on Saul. And so here he is in the palace, or if they had palaces, who knows? Back in those days, perhaps it was, let's just say, uh, maybe not as palatial as later palaces, like what King Herod had, or something like that. So, well, we don't know. We just don't know what their palace was like, their court was like. But it was probably better than the common man. And so war breaks out, and here's Saul's chance again to try to get rid of David with no political backlash on him, that he would be trying to kill a very popular person in Israel. He could send him out there to war, and if he died on the battlefield, give him a hero's funeral, and then be done with it. That sort of thing, and he could just wipe his hands of it, and that was that. And so, but again, David just didn't do anything right in far as Saul is concerned. He went out there into war, a battle against the Philistines, and by golly, he won again. And not only that, it says the slaughter was great. He really won. And so now he's trying to okay, now what do I do with him? So they bring him back, and so Saul is probably sitting there thinking again, back to those old songs that Saul has killed his thousands, David killed his 10,000s, that sort of thing. And yeah, I know I shouldn't sing while I'm doing this, but that sort of thing is one that David. He's just good. He's just really good. And so he's sitting there playing his harp, and Saul picks up the spear, and he doesn't throw, doesn't seem like he threw it at him this time. It says that he wanted to pin David to the wall. So to me, it might have been like, okay, I got you this time. I'm not going to chance throwing this thing at you and missing. And so here he is charging David with this spear, and David dropped a note or two there, and he was out of there. And then Saul kept on going with the spear, and next thing and it drove the spear into the wall. So that would I don't know, that to me indicates that maybe Saul was he had the thing in his hand, is trying to get David. So but it said David slipped away from Saul's face so that he drove the spear into the wall, and that night David fled and got away. So David is he's slippery, he is sneaky, and he's out of there very fast on his feet, David the cat. And so he was gone. And so there's a kind of a thing here that I put down. I don't know if you can see these things. This is what you would call in the biblical literature a chiasm, or other people call it a chiasm. I don't know. It just depends on whether you're speaking English or you're speaking Hebrew, whether it's a chiasm or a chiasm. I don't know. I don't know. So maybe somebody that's real smart can tell me that one. I don't know. But it's a CHI chi ASM. Yeah, a chiasm. And what it does is that in the literature you'll have a theme, and then later on you'll have a sub theme, or a different kind of theme, and then you keep on going. Then you'll have that like the first theme. Saul directly tried to kill David in 18:10 there in the 1 Samuel 18:10. Then the B there, Saul indirectly tries to kill David by sending him out against the Philistines, and that's in 18:17 through 20. And then again, B prime, where Saul again indirectly tries to kill or tries to use Jonathan and Saul's men to kill David. And then finally, you got A prime going back to the main theme where Saul directly tried to kill David, and that's in 19:8 and 10, 8 through 10. So that's called a chiasm or chiasm, and you see that all throughout the Bible with that. And sometimes you'll get A, B, C, D, E, and F, and then F prime, E, back on up to A prime. And so it gets long and involved, especially, like if you're studying things like Daniel and Revelation, you'll see very large chiasms there. All right. Any comments or questions on that? Okay, just try to figure out now how you would use that word tomorrow in a sentence and really impress somebody. Okay? All right. So in 1 Samuel 19:11 through 12, then Saul sent agents to David's house to watch him in order to kill him in the morning. But David's wife, Michal, warned him and said, if you don't escape for your life tonight, tomorrow you will be dead. So Michal lowered David down through the window, and thus he fled. He fled, and escaped. Okay, now, I guess if I'm going to say Michal, I should say David, but I always forget. All right, so anyway, she has somehow found out that they got bad guys out there outside the door. Soon as David comes out there in the morning and he goes, "Good morning, world," is zap. They're gonna kill him. And so she says, "Look, if you don't make it out of here tonight under cover of darkness, you're going to be history tomorrow." And so she let him out the window. And so that would tell me that they lived on one of the, they lived uptown in one of the better sections of town, like on the wall, a high section or something like that, where they had a window and they could let him down either into the street or outside the wall so that he could escape from Saul's men. And so there were other times, you remember Rahab, they let the guys go through the window. And then also Paul he escaped through a window like that, where they lowered him down. And so not an unprecedented thing here. So in verse 13, then Michal took a household idol, laid it on the bed, put a quilt of goat's hair at the head, and covered it with a cloth. All right, now, is there anything in there that just jumps right out at you and at that one particular verse?
Of course, what's an idol doing in the house?
Exactly. What are they doing with an idol in the house? Now, you remember that back in the day with Jacob's wife, Rachel, now she had the household items of her father, Laban. And but those were small enough that she could stuff them in a saddlebag and sit on the saddle of the camel, and they wouldn't know. But this one here, they said that I mean, she laid it in the bed as kind of like, in the movies, where they're doing a bed check in the prisons, and they look around there, and there's the Mac the cat burglar there in the prison, and you see this lump there, and in under the covers, and the guard just walks on by. All the while, Mac the cat burglar has dug a hole someplace, and he is secreting himself out of the prison, and he gets away, and all that sort of stuff. So what she did the same thing here. She put this household item. Well, a little bit of research looking into it. There was a practice back in the day that a lot of times wealthy women, could have a statue commissioned of their husband, and then that way, when he was away doing whatever husbands did back in those days when they were away, and David especially going and fighting wars and stuff, that they would have this statue there to remind them of their husband. And it was pretty much kind of life size anyway. Maybe not quite life size, but enough that when the wife would get frustrated and angry, she could go over there and punch it a few times and take out her frustrations. And so Michal had this thing, and she laid it up in the bed, and then covered it up with goat's hair at the head. Put a nice little quilt or rug of goat's hair. Kind of tells you what kind of hair David had. Yuck. And then put some kind of a head covering on it, and pulled it up over there like, oh man, look at him. He's really, really sick. I mean, in fact, he might be dead. Like, here he is, stiff as a log, and so the guards that came, the agents of Saul that came and looked, and they said, "Oh yeah, he's sick. What's he got? We'll stay out of here because he probably has the West Mesopotamian virus, and we don't want anything about that." So they back off. And then they go to Saul and say, "Yeah, he's sick in bed." Saul says, "Yeah, right. Bring him in that bed to me right now." So they trundle back over there to David's house, and Michal said, "Well, okay. I guess the jig is up here, and now that he had escaped." So and then next thing you know, these guys come back and tell Saul that he escaped, and so yeah, he wants to know. He brings his daughter in and says, "Why have you let him, my enemy, escape?" And Michal, what is she going to say to Saul? She says, "Because I love him and you're a louse." No, she said, "Oh, he said to me if I didn't help him get away, he was going to kill me." That's her defense. All right. So what else is she going to say? Well, we know that from then, because we've read the rest of the book and the follow-on book, we know that sometimes Michal, is a little bit duplicitous. Okay. And so anyway, that business of having the statue that comes from a couple of Jewish sages, Abarbanel and Abindana, and both of those guys. You try to say that real fast when you've been in the cups. But whatever kind of guesses, it's the idea that it may not have been a god as such, an idol as it is, it could very well have been a statue of David or something. But the point is that it was sufficiently deceptive that it allowed David to get away and make good on his mistake, on his escape. So in verse 18 says, so David fled and escaped and went to Samuel at Ramah, and told him that all that Saul had done to him. Then he and Samuel went and stayed at Naioth. As Saul was told, Saul was told, behold, David is Naioth in Ramah. And so Saul sent agents to seize David. But they saw a band of prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing and presiding over them. Then the Ruach, the Spirit of God, came upon Saul's agents, and they too prophesied. All right. Now, David, he takes off, and where does he go? I mean, he can't go home. I mean, that would put his family in danger. Plus, he was already up there. Remember that he was at Gibeah. Well, it's just a few miles over to Ramah, and that's where he knew Samuel was at. Now, he was the prophet emeritus. He had been retired for a while, and but still, he was the go-to guy when you had a real bad problem spiritually. And David had a big problem spiritually, physically, and every other way. So he went to the guy that anointed him and put him in that mess to begin with, by anointing him as the new king. And so Samuel said, okay, well, let's go. And they went from there over to Naioth. Now, Naioth was a part of Ramah, and it was they feel like that was the school of the prophets. That's where that was the yeshiva, or whatever you want to call it. That's where Samuel taught other people in Torah and so forth. And so so they said they saw a band of prophets prophesying, and they look at, and I don't know, I looked at all of the different sorts of things. Nobody could kind of tell me what it meant by prophesying, other than maybe praising God. And is prophesying always is it always telling the future, or is it sometimes just telling things that like it wouldn't have to be telling the future. It could possibly be where they would tell something about someone, or they would say like they're prophesying before the Lord, and then the word of God came on this one prophet Yochanan, and he says, you know what, the mayor in Gibeah, he's skimming the tax money. That's how come he's getting so rich, or something. Maybe that's what they did. I don't know. It just said that they were prophesying, and others said that, well, this prophesying meant that they were in some kind of an ecstatic state, which could have been, because you remember when the Spirit of God came down on the priests at the building of at the dedication of the first temple, that they couldn't stand up because of the glory of God. Then there were other times when that same sort of thing happened. So it could be that they were in some kind of an ecstatic state, just praising God and so forth. But then what happened was that they came back, and these guys said, well, every time we would get up there, the Spirit of God would get over us, and we just couldn't do anything except praise God. And so then we back off. And so he sent two other groups of agents over there, and the same thing happened. They would get there in this area. I mean, what a revival was going on in Naioth. I mean, this was something maybe even more than the Brownsville revival a few years ago, where the Spirit of God was just so powerful over these places. And so they would come in, and as soon as they would get in the proximity, they would start prophesying itself. And then the Bible says that we don't exactly know what that prophesying meant, but it was evidently something that the people recognized as coming from God, and that it was not a negative thing. It was a positive thing. So they, all three groups, same thing happened to each one of them. So finally Saul says, all right, you got to, I'm going to go there myself. You'd never send a boy to do a man's job. So here he goes. And he got there, and guess what? As soon as he got there within range, that the Spirit of God came on Saul. And let me go ahead and read that. When Saul was told, he sent other agents, and they too prophesied. Then Saul sent a third group of messengers, and they too prophesied. Then he himself went to Ramah, and when he arrived at the great cistern in Seku, he asked, "Where is Samuel? Where are Samuel and David?" And someone answered, "Look, they're in Naioth at Ramah." So he proceeded there to Naioth at Ramah, and the Ruach of God, the Spirit of God, came upon him as well. And he prophesied as he kept walking until he arrived at Naioth at Ramah. And then, verse 24, the controversial deal here, or are they, as they say over in the UK, a controversy. And he said he too stripped off his clothes. He too. I mean, did other people? And he too prophesied before Samuel, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. And that is why people were saying, is Saul too among the prophets? All right. So here's the deal, and I don't even know that it's important, but it says that he too stripped off his clothes. Now, was there something about prophesying that that made people take their clothes off? Like some people, some of the commentators said, "Oh, no, all he did was took off his armor and his royal robes and his kingly crown and that sort of stuff, and laid it aside, and he was prophesying there that way." That he wouldn't have taken off his clothes, but then it said that he laid down naked all day and all that night. And so the problem I have with it is not so much the nudity that might have been involved, but the idea that so many people can't take what God's word says literally. They have to put it into a box, and so I looked up the word naked here. It's the same word that they use or the same root that was used in Genesis with Adam and Eve as being naked, and they were not ashamed, and so forth. So it leads us to wonder, okay, in what state did the prophets, I mean, certainly they would not have gone around naked all the time. No, I don't think so. But Saul was so out of it and so far from God that perhaps God said, okay, you're going to really make a fool of yourself. I'm going to make you make a fool of yourself. And so he took off all of his clothes there. And so when they were saying, is Saul among the prophets, maybe not so much because of the nudity, but more because that he was there prophesying and in a religious, ecstatic state of some sort. The Bible is unclear on that. I don't know. Anybody got a comment or an idea on what that could have been? Maybe you've read something that could enlighten us. Okay, nobody wants to skinny dip in that pond, do they? All right. So we just don't know. I mean, was he naked or not? You decide. It doesn't really make any difference. All right, so that ends chapter 19, and so now we're going to go. We did chapter 19 in about 40 minutes, and now I'm going to do chapter 20 in about 4 minutes to get us out of here. All right, so chapter 20, it's divided up. There's about 5 major episodes here in chapter 20, and it's David is concerned for his safety. You think. And so he goes to Jonathan. They talk about it. Jonathan and David, they renew their covenant with each other, and then try to figure out, okay, now how are we going to get the word out to David about what's happening with Saul and so forth. And then there's the bit about Saul's anger with David at not being at this feast. And then finally, David bails out of Gibeah, and he never comes back into Saul's court ever again. So, so he gets to Jonathan. He's concerned. He asks Jonathan, "Okay, what have I done to deserve your father always trying to kill me? Every time I come around, Saul says, 'I'm going to kill you,' and he says, 'So what did I do?' 'Well, nothing you've done. It's just." He's jealous. He's paranoid. He's got an evil spirit. So David said, "Well, look, you don't believe me. I mean, evidently Jonathan could not believe that he just wasn't getting on board that his father would want to kill his best friend." And so David said, "All right, look, this is the way you figure this out." And so they had new moon feast, and at these new moons every month, they would have to get together, and in some cases it was a 2-day feast because of the idea of not seeing the moon at a certain time. Maybe it was cloudy, overcast, and they counted their months by when they actually could see that sliver of the moon. And so when they would do that, they would have a nice big feast. The king would have a feast, and some families would have a feast, maybe just one a year on a new moon. It's the Rosh Chodesh feast, but and that's one thing that once we get our own building someday, then we will be observing a Rosh Chodesh service every month, and getting together once a month for the new moon observation. And so David said, "Look, if I'm not there at the feast, because I'm one of his main generals, you would think that he would want me there. My seat is going to be empty, and so we'll know if it's safe for me to come back or not." And so if Saul was okay with him, if he didn't say anything, he was just gone. Okay, maybe it's okay. But if he was angry at David, then David was still in danger. So that's kind of how that went. And so then the next few verses get together and talk about Jonathan and David. They covenant together. They swear that, okay, we're going to try to figure this out. And so Jonathan says, "I will find out what his plans are, and then I will tell you." Okay. So Jonathan evidently recognizes David's right to the throne, because when he prayed, or when he's in kind of a swore an oath that and they prayed that God would protect or would be with David like he was with Saul, meaning that, okay, David is going to be the king, so that God would be with David the king like he was with Saul the king. So then he recognizes that, and Jonathan evidently was just he knew what God wanted, and he was not trying to buck it. And so he then asked David, because he knew that David was going to be the king. He says, "Look, do not," he said, "if you would, please do not kill my family and all of my father's family once you become king, once he is no longer king." Because it was very common back in those days that when you had a new king, if he wasn't like the son of the old king, and there was a direct line there, no brothers or whatever, that when they had a new king, then the family of the old king was they were dispatched in one way or another so that they would not pose a threat to the new king, if you get my drift. All right, so he asked David not to kill his family. Then they renew their commitment again. They go back to their covenant to each other and say, okay, we're going to keep this covenant. All right, and then so how do you figure out what's going to happen here? So David was supposed to hide in this field. Jonathan would shoot some arrows out toward David hiding behind this big rock, and then he would send a boy out to gather up the arrows. And by the way that he shot the arrows and his instructions to the young boy, then David would know the outcome. Okay, but then what happened then, that no matter what they agreed, no matter what the outcome, whether Saul wants David dead or Saul doesn't want David dead, the bottom line of it is that the bond between Jonathan and David was still strong, and it would last until they died. One of them died. Okay, so so we have the feast. And David wasn't there for the first night of the feast. Well, guess what? Saul didn't say nothing. He was just quiet about it, and so it was just well, that's kind of confusing, and it said so he gets there, and then Saul said to himself, well, okay, he can't come to the feast. Maybe he was unclean for one reason or another. He had, maybe he'd killed a Philistine or somewhere along the line, and he he was just unclean. So he didn't do anything. But the next night he wasn't there, and then he goes to Jonathan and says, hey, where's David? He's missing. And Jonathan said, oh, well, he wanted to go to his father's house because they were celebrating this feast. And so they do this just once a year. And so they wanted him to come there to his father's house and celebrate the feast. And so at that point, Saul came unglued again. And he was just so he was so angry with Jonathan, and the wording that he used here was, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman." Okay, so that translates in modern English to USOB. I mean, that's what he called his son. Okay, and he said, don't I know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? So for as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, David lives on earth, neither you nor your kingship will be secure. Well, I mean, yeah, but God had already told Saul, no, bud, you're it. I mean, this is it. Your kingship ends when you do. But he wasn't accepting of any of that. So anyway, Jonathan answered his father and says, so why should he be put to death? What has he done? And then this time Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him down. He hurled his own spear at his own son, his heir apparent, his crown prince. So at this point it says, so Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. You reckon? Okay. So Jonathan rose up from the table in fierce anger. He didn't eat the food the second day of the month, for he was grieved over David because his father had dishonored him. All right. So it then came to pass on the next morning that Jonathan went out to that field close by somewhere at the time that he and David had agreed on. and they had a little boy with him, and maybe a pretty young guy, because he could have him go chase the arrows, but then the kid, if he shot 2 or 3 arrows out there, then the kid would think, okay, he's just doing a little target practice. If he just shot 1 arrow out there, the kid might have figured out, okay, why did he do that? So they wanted somebody that wasn't going to ask a bunch of questions. And he said, told the guy, the little boy, that he said, run, find the arrows that I'm about to shoot. So as the lad was running, he shot an arrow past him. When the lad reached the place of the arrows that Jonathan shot, Jonathan cried out after the lad said, isn't the arrow beyond you? Isn't it further? And then Jonathan called out for the lad, quick, hurry, don't stand there. So Jonathan's lad picked up the arrow and came to his master. So, but at that point, then that was part of the signal that if Jonathan said, no, the arrow is out there further than where you are, that meant that, yeah, get out of here, because Saul is going to, he still wants to kill you. And if he had said, no, the arrows are up here someplace just before you, then David would know that he could come back. Well, it wasn't. He had to leave. So they sent, Jonathan sent the little boy back with the arrows and his bow and said, just take it back into town. And then he went over to this big rock called the Izel, and we don't even know where that is, what it was. Was it a street marker, a road marker, some kind of a thing? We don't really know. It's but it's a rock of, it has become known as a rock of separation. So David and Jonathan, they got together, they embraced and cried, and they said David cried even more than Jonathan did, and because what? Basically, their friendship was gone. It was gone. I mean, could be friends, but they could never really be pals ever again. And so Jonathan said to David, go in peace, go in shalom, that we both have sworn to each other in the name of Adonai, saying, may Adonai be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever. Basically, he's just saying, may God protect and keep all of our offspring forever.